What is the current status of legal proceedings at the ICC concerning Israel's actions in Gaza?
The Trial Chamber of the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant, arrest warrants for war crimes, including the war crime of starvation in the Gaza Strip. So, in other words, depriving intentionally civilians of essential goods, and the war crimes also of intentional attacks against civilians in the same strip, and crimes against humanity as well. Where we stand now is the stage in which these arrest warrants have not been implemented. Netanyahu also got the possibility to visit one of the state parties, at least, that had the legal obligation to arrest him. I'm referring to Hungary.
What are the legal and geopolitical obstacles in this case, especially because these are victims you are representing before the ICC?
Well, first of all, there are the technical difficulties which are common to all international criminal proceedings, because investigating massive crimes is always extremely difficult, particularly for a tribunal which is not based in the territory of a state where these crimes are committed. And we are talking of crimes that generally involve hundred, even thousands of perpetrators, and even the victims are unfortunately thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, like we are seeing in the Gaza Strip. This is the most documented situation for commission of international crimes. We are talking of Gaza, but particularly this applies also to the West Bank. I mean, just to give an example, if we think about the settlement as a war crime under the statute of the International Criminal Court, this is the most documented war crime. I mean, almost all the evidence is public, and so it will take not too long to open and close an investigation in this regard.
Do you feel that the treatment, the ICC's treatment towards genocide in Gaza has been different when you compare it with other conflicts, such as the one in Ukraine?
The ICC has approached the situation in Palestine with this policy of double standard, as I said before. In other words, it has treated Palestine in a different way. In other words, it seems that it has surrendered to the political pressures by states that states have imposed on different times on the court itself.
Gaza is in ruins. For the last 22 months, over 62,000 people have been killed and entire communities erased. Today, we speak with Professor Triestino Mariniello. He is a professor of law at Liverpool John Moores University and a member of the legal team representing the victims of Gaza before the International Criminal Court. We ask, what evidence matters? Who's blocking justice? And can international law hold the most powerful states to account? Thank you for joining us, Professor.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Munif.
My first question to you, what is the current status of legal proceedings at the ICC concerning Israel's actions in Gaza?
Well, first of all, just a brief clarification. The International Criminal Court is not dealing with Israel conduct in the Gaza Strip. The International Criminal Court does not have any competence in relation to state responsibility. The ICC just deals with individual criminal responsibility. So in this case, with the Israeli military leaders, in particular Netanyahu, Prime Minister, and Gallant, former Defense Minister, for individual conduct. So this is an important difference if we compare the ICC, for instance, to the International Court of Justice of the United Nations, which deals with state responsibility. So, going back to your question, where are we now? We are at the stage in which, as everyone knows, in May 2024, in November 2024, the Trial Chamber of the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. Arrest warrants for war crimes, including the war crime of starvation in the Gaza Strip. So, in other words, depriving intentionally civilians of essential goods, and war crimes also of intentional attacks against civilians in the same strip, and crimes against humanity as well, including, for instance, just to mention one, the crime against humanity of persecution, which actually affect the entire Gaza population, more than 2 million people in the entire strip. Where we stand now is the stage in which these arrest warrants have not been implemented. Netanyahu also got the possibility to visit one of the state parties, at least that had the legal obligation to arrest him. I'm referring to Hungary. He has also been flying over states that should have also implemented the arrest warrants. I'm referring in particular to Italy, Greece, and France. So we are at a stage in which the arrest warrants have not been implemented. As the Office of the Prosecutor has also publicly stated on a number of occasions, the investigations are still ongoing. And this means that the same scope of the investigation of the proceedings could be wider if the Office of the Prosecutor gets evidence also in relation to other crimes, which are not limited to the Gaza Strip, but also to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, that, as we know, the Commission of International Crimes is widely documented today, as well also in this other part of the Palestinian occupied territory. Whether or not this will bring to any development, this will depend on will happen in the very next few months. At the moment, there is an appeal submitted by Israel challenging the jurisdiction of the court and also the admissibility of the cases. And in the next very few months, we will know how the trial chamber and the appeals chamber of the International Criminal Court will approach what they will decide in relation to these submissions by the Israeli authorities.
And so, if I may ask, I know you mentioned a very sharp clarification between the ICC and the ICJ earlier when we started this
Sure.
interview. But I'm going to sound naive, and a lot of our audiences in India, some are informed and some are not. But I do want to ask, what are the legal and geopolitical obstacles in this case, especially because these are victims you are representing before the
Yeah.
ICC?
Well, first of all, there are the technical difficulties which are common to all international criminal proceedings, because investigating massive crimes is always extremely difficult, particularly for a tribunal which is not based in the territory of a state where these crimes are committed. And we are talking of crimes that generally involve hundred, even thousand of perpetrators, and even the victims are unfortunately thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, like we are seeing in the Gaza Strip. So the investigation themselves are complex because we are talking of massive crimes. Then, when it comes specifically to the Israeli-Palestinian setting, it's even more difficult because of the incredibly high pressure that are placed on the International Criminal Court. These pressures, in some instances, are public. For instance, I'm referring in particular to the sanctions imposed by the Trump administration over the International Criminal Court. So far, the prosecutor of the ICC, two deputy prosecutors, and four judges, well, actually, now 6 judges with the last decisions have been, sanctions have been imposed on them. Sanctions means, in other words, economic sanctions and the possibility to get access to the US territory. So limitation of freedom of movement and economic sanctions. This is really an unprecedented decision, which, as I said, places an incredibly strong pressure on the court itself, that on the other side is not receiving the support that it should be receiving from the state parties that should be supposed to defend and protect the institution in front of such incredibly strong attacks, and even by the European Union, that so far has not put in place any measures that will be part of its own legislation to stop or at least reduce the effects on the sanctions on the International Criminal Court. So the paradox is now that people committing the most serious crimes under international law, international criminal law, have not received any sanctions, while in individuals who are mandated to provide victims with justice, so international prosecutors and international justice judges, they are subject to sanctions. This is really an incredibly unacceptable paradox, and it's really clear evidence of the time we are living now. And the time is that the entire international justice system is at risk if there is no proper political support
You
to
know,
it.
sir, you did mention sanctions, and a few weeks ago we were interviewing the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, and she did mention about sanctions, and she did say that it seems that I am being treated at par as Osama bin Laden was treated at a certain point. She compared her treatment to that, and from what you say, it is very concerning. But when we come to evidence and documentation, in this case, uh, there is widespread destruction in Gaza. We have seen images come out from Gaza for the last 22 months. How does one investigate or how does one obtain credible and admissible evidence in such situations?
Well, first of all, just a word on what Francesca Albanese was saying. And looking back at her sanction, part of the motivation, maybe the most important one, was exactly for her work with the International Criminal Court. And the same applies now to the most recent sanctions against the Palestinian Authority. It seems that the International Criminal Court is the biggest source of concern both for Israel and the US. And what she was saying in relation to be compared to Osama bin Laden is correct, because if we look at the executive order which has been imposed, which imposes sanctions, the executive order in US legislation is an emergency measure which should be used to impose sanctions on individuals who are accused of serious violation of human rights law, dictators, for instance, or international drug traffickers. So what we are seeing now is that these individuals, including UN special rapporteurs, are on the same place, on the same level of serious abusers of human rights and international drug traffickers. So when it comes to specific context of Palestine and your question on evidence, this is the most documented situation for commission of international crimes. We are talking of Gaza, but particularly this applies also to the West Bank. I mean, just to give an example, if we think about the settlement as a war crime under the Statute of the International Criminal Court, this is the most documented war crime. I mean, almost all the evidence is public, and so it will take not too long to open and close an investigation in this regard. So, of course, international investigators can rely in first instance on open source evidence, which is extremely important today in relation to international criminal proceedings. But of course, that they may be enough at a very early stage of the proceedings, but then they need more, I would say, direct evidence. In these specific circumstances, of course, the office of the prosecutor has plenty of instruments despite the lack of access to discuss with individuals, to engage with individuals who have direct evidence and to get such evidence from them.
And so, that was last month we were interviewing Raji Sourani, the Palestinian human rights lawyer. And one thing he did mention was the treatment of the ICC towards Gaza. And to be more specific, what I want to ask is that do you feel that the ICC's treatment towards genocide in Gaza has been different when you compare it with other conflicts, such as the one in Ukraine?
Well, what we have seen, first of all, it's important a clarification. The clarification is that the situation in the state of Palestine was brought for the first time before the International Criminal Court in 2009. So it didn't start on the 7th of October, it didn't start after October 2023.
Yeah.
And this investigation has been approached by the International Criminal Court at least until Karim Khan's decision to request arrest warrant in in May 2024, with a clear policy of double standards if we compare this investigation, this situation to the other situation before the International Criminal Court, for a very simple reason, because it took several years for the court, despite all the evidence related to the commission of international crimes in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Only in 2021, for the first time, the former prosecutor of the ICC, Fatou Bensouda, opened officially an investigation. The first prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Luis Moreno Campos, spent several years of this investigation, but at the end, with mainly political arguments, he decided not to open any investigation, which was absolutely shocking. Only in 2021 this happened. Then Karim Khan took office, and he started to put in place effective investigation only after October 7, 2023, and we have to admit here that once he started to put in place effective investigation, he showed an incredibly high commitment to the investigation itself, and he was not only requesting arrest warrants, but as he was saying, the investigation was still ongoing. But before this happened, for really several years, so we are since again 2009, the ICC has approached the situation in Palestine with this policy of double standard, as I said before. In other words, it has treated Palestine in a different way. In other words, it seems that it has surrendered to the political pressures by states that states have imposed on different times on the court itself. Of course, the big question, which is really a rhetoric question here, is would be assisting to the same commission of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza if the ICC had intervened before, if the ICC before 2024 had started to put in place effective investigation and to put an end to the impunity in this context. I say the rhetoric question because my answer is yes. I'm extremely convinced that if international organizations, starting from the ICC, had started to put an end to impunity enjoyed by Israeli political and military leaders, today the situation in Palestine and in Gaza in particular will be completely different, as impunity is really the fertile soil in which international crimes are committed by the Israeli authorities yesterday and today, and
And
unfortunately even
you mentioned atrocities, and yesterday we saw the visuals from South Gaza's Nasser hospital, where at least 5 journalists were killed, and
yeah.
on live camera. And you talked about pressures to begin with, and I had a very pinpointed question on that. And I'll be very blunt with this: is that has the US and EU's political interest directly obstructed legal accountability for the widespread of atrocities in Gaza?
Well, as we said before, the US is doing that directly. It's targeting the ICC staff, so the US is doing that. While when it comes to the EU state parties that you raised in your question, the problem here is that they are not doing what they will be supposed to do. Also, not as part of their political discretion, but as part of their legal obligation that they have accepted in the very same moment in which they ratified the Statute of the International Criminal Court. 125 states, and this includes all EU state parties, have a clear obligation to cooperate with the International Criminal Court, which means also implementing arrest warrants. While what we have seen after the decision of the ICC to issue arrest warrants, we have seen the statements by political leaders, members of governments, prime ministers in Germany, in Italy, in France, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, while in Hungary, as we said before, and the list is long, saying that they would have not complied with the decision of the International Criminal Court. Hungary, as we said before, welcomed the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu. So this is really unacceptable. from an international justice perspective, because states have clear obligation to cooperate with the court and to implement arrest warrants. So they are not placing pressure directly like the US, but they are undermining the credibility and the legitimacy of the same institution every time they argue that they are not going to comply with the court decision. This is the biggest issue now, that on one side we have direct attacks, on the other side we have continuous attempts by each state parties to undermine the credibility and legitimacy. I think this is very dangerous and naive as well, because these state parties maybe, they believe that they are undermining the work of the court only in relation to the investigation in Palestine, without understanding that they are affecting the credibility and legitimacy of the entire institution, which means affecting the work of the court in every single investigation, from the Philippines to Ukraine to Myanmar, and the list is long here as well, because there is not such thing, sorry, and I'm going to conclude, in international law there is not something like selective attacks. You destroy the entire institution that, once it loses its credibility, cannot operate in any other context.
So I was going to ask you this question, but I must say, what happens to international law when powerful states actively shield their close allies?
Well, international law has shown that even in these 22 months in Gaza, there are instruments under international that can be used in a context like this. We have seen the ICJ proceedings established by South Africa or by Nicaragua against Germany. We have seen the ICC proceedings. The problem here is the political will of states, in particular of some states, to implement. So far, a very few states have complied with the binding decision of the International Court of Justice in the proceedings established by South Africa in relation to the genocide case. And as we have said before, many states have said they are not complying with the ICC decisions. What is missing here is not international law. What is missing here is the political will of states to comply in a clear policy of double standards, because the same states have used all, or at least almost most of international law instruments in relation to the situation in Ukraine, when were supposed to do the same against Russia or individuals, political representatives of Russia, like the Russian President Putin. So if today there is still a part of international law instruments have still some credibility and legitimacy left, this is thanks not to Western states, but thanks to states from Global South. I'm referring to South Africa, that has brought the proceedings against Israel to the ICJ. I'm referring to Nicaragua, that has done the same for complicity against Germany. I'm referring to a number of states that have referred the situation in Palestine before the International Criminal Court. In the past, Comoros Islands, now Djibouti, Chile, and here there are the few states. So these states are sending a very important message that there is no alternative to international law. There is no alternative. The alternative to international law is what we are seeing today in Gaza. But today, the victims of this destruction of international legal order are Palestinians. Tomorrow, the victims will be someone else, because once you have destroyed those rules that the international community has adopted after the end of the Second World War to avoid the recommission of similar atrocities, everyone can be victim of that. Everyone can be victim of attacks, as we have clearly seen yesterday live also against Palestinians in Gaza.
And so, coming to the victims themselves, I know that this must be a very, very difficult task with each victim that you represent. And I wanted to ask about justice for victims. I mean, how can legal accountability translate into meaningful justice for these people who've lost their families, their homes, entire communities?
Well, it's important to emphasize that even today, after, the almost complete destruction of the Gaza Strip, when there is a concrete risk that more than 2 million people may be subject to ethnic cleansing, to deportation as part of the genocidal plan of the Israeli authorities. Victims in Gaza are still requesting for justice. That's their request. They know clearly that what's happening to them are international crimes, are genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. And they are asking for justice, and they want justice in particular from the International Criminal Court, because they are fully aware that there is no alternative for them to the International Criminal Court. Sometimes we may see, particularly in mainstream media in Western countries, even yesterday, after the attack to the hospital, that Israel will put in place an investigation to see what happens. There is nothing which is more false than this. Israel has never put in place any independent and impartial investigation when it comes to crimes committed against Palestinians. The Israeli justice system has the objective to protect Israelis from any accountability, from any responsibility when they are responsible of international crimes against Palestinians. So the ICC for them is the only possibility, concrete possibility to get justice, bringing their stories before the International Criminal Court, seeing the arrest warrants implemented, and establishing the truth and documenting what's happening in Gaza is the request that comes from victims in Palestine, but in general for victims of all the most serious crimes in the world.
Yeah. And so I'm going to come to my final two questions, and this is something I
Sure.
want to ask you at my personal level. After everything you witnessed, do you still have hope for justice for the victims of Gaza?
Well, the answer is yes, otherwise I will not be doing this. And I'm sure that this is going to happen. I'm sure that, as we know, international legal proceedings take time, as we have seen, and there are incredibly high pressures. But we are in a stage in which even these pressures are and will be unable to stop justice. Justice, there will be justice, there will be accountability. The measure responsible of these crimes will be held accountable. Of course, that's not enough today to stop the atrocities. That's not enough to stop the ongoing genocide in Gaza, which is the priority now. That really requires the direct commitment of states, requires a political will. International law plays an important role, but what plays even a more important role in the short term, when there is no time to wait for the intervention of international organizations, is states intervening, but not intervening because they can decide whether to do it or not. They have legal obligation under the Genocide Convention to intervene. They have the legal obligation to do what civil society organization is doing when, for instance, they send Freedom Flotilla to Gaza. They have a legal obligation to break the siege in Gaza and bring humanitarian aid to the population, to deploy a peacekeeping mission in the Gaza Strip to protect Palestinians and to stop immediately the ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip. This cannot be done by international law. This can be done by political intervention, exactly like it's happening in other contexts. The problem here is that in other contexts, as I said before, states are using international law instruments, not in this one. This is exactly what is unacceptable today.
And so my final question, what moral and legal responsibility does the international community bear in naming and prosecuting genocide?
Well, you say the right word, genocide, because especially we hear on many levels, people with very different qualification arguing that this is not a genocide. First of all, it's crucial a qualification. Whether or not this is genocide must be established by international organizations. The International Court of Justice, as we said before, the maximum judicial body of the United Nations, already in January 2024, on 26 January 2024, said it was plausible that Israel was committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. I mean, after 1 year and a half, the situation has got just worse and worse. And on three different organizations. Whether or not this is genocide must be decided by international organizations and by international legal experts, like the UN Special Rapporteurs, scholars, experts, and more than 800 experts in international law genocide studies already in October 2023, they said that there was genocide ongoing, but not because they were smarter than other ones, because they could see from the statements of Israeli political and military leaders clear evidence of what is generally most difficult thing to prove when it comes to genocide, which is the intent to destroy in whole or in part the protected group. So first, going back to your question, it's crucial to put it under the correct legal qualification. It's a genocide. And after that, we have to say exactly what I was saying before, that once this is a genocide, there are clear legal obligations for states to intervene under the Genocide Convention, which is called Convention on the Prevention, first of all, of genocide. So even if states believe that there is not an ongoing, even if there is just a risk in their minds of genocide, which is not actually true, they should intervene to prevent such genocide. How? By adopting all possible measures to stop the ongoing genocide. All possible measures means, under international law, sanctions against Israel, means full arms embargo. It's really unacceptable, and it's a violation, it's a complicity in the commission of genocide when states like US, Germany, Italy, United Kingdom are still exporting weapons or dual-use items to Israel used against civilians in the Gaza Strip. So this is not part, as I said, of their political discretion. This shows complicity in the commission of genocide. So adopting sanctions, putting an end to arms transfer to Israel, deploying an independent and impartial peacekeeping mission, supporting the work of the International Criminal Court and of the International Court of Justice. These are exactly some of the measures that states should adopt if they want to comply with their legal obligation under the Genocide Convention.
I really appreciate you taking all the time to join us, sir. And I
Thank
really
you very
hope
much
that
for
you
the
continue
interview.
doing the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you. Thank you.